Hey guys and gals, welcome to part 2 of our interview with Guy Costantini. If you haven't heard part 1 yet, make sure to go back and listen to it. And if you're on social media, let us know. We'd love to hear your thoughts on each episode. That's enough of me, now for the rest of the interview.
So I started talking to you about Pong and spending hours doing that. Now, your game, The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners. So you mentioned that that's your baby. Are you telling me that, again, I don't have experience with this at all, but are you saying that you can actually feel the resistance if you're pulling it out of one of the walker's heads?
Yeah, so let me explain to you a couple of the systems that we have in the game, because this will kind of illustrate it. So there is vibration and there is sort of haptic feedback in your controllers, but on top of that, we layered the system that we call visual haptics, which is the simulation of object weight and the simulation, basically visual stimulus that shows you something that makes your brain interpret it as weight. So for example, when you're trying to pull up a heavy object, where your arm is in the virtual world versus where your arm is in the real world is a little bit offset. And what that does is it makes you feel the weight of the object. And that's just an example, right? So when I stab a walker, I will feel a little resistance and I stab through. And then after I'm done stabbing through, the walker will come with me if I pull, and it has weight, right? And it behaves through realistic physics. So that is part of the experience, and how it's a mix of actual tactile feeling that we can convey to you, and using what you see to trick you into augmenting that tactile feeling. And that's part of the magic of it. And then of course you are in it. We have this thing that we internally call the tension engine, which is we are just making your. We like to have you in a state where you are kind of close to being panicked, but not really. So you're kind of tense, and then like eventually you'll run into a situation that'll drive you to panic, and then we'll pull you back a little, and you get a little bit of a break, and then you're back into panic. And so there's a lot, and it's programmatic, so there's a lot of like unpredictable situations that happen. They're very surprising and satisfying. So like you may think that killing a walker is easy, and you'll get familiar with it, and then you'll see 2 or 3, and you're like, that's not too bad, I can take him. And then before you know it, there's like 5 or 6, and you dropped your gun, and like your knife is about to break, and now you're in the shit, right? Like, and now you're like your body is panicking, you're pushing them away, but now you're tired. We have a stamina system that essentially like emulates you getting tired from having to shake off all these walkers, and so what the game does really effectively is drive you into situations that you thought you were prepared for, and then show you that you're not prepared for that. And slowly you get better at this, right? So you will really understand whether or not you will survive a zombie apocalypse. And also you will really learn a lot about sort of the things that games do in 2D that you assume are the truth, but really are designed for you to have fun, right? We're also designing our stuff to have fun. Like we didn't go hyper realistic, because then most people would just never hit a target. And it would just be like super frustrating. So we're very careful about sort of driving a ton of realism while also keeping the game super fun. So, for example, having to reload a 2-handed weapon while there's walkers on you is the first time you do it, you're like, oh my God, why do I even have a 2-handed weapon? This is useless. I want to have a knife and a pistol. And that is the most effective way to like go around, right? There are situations where a 2-hander is a lot more effective. Like you're trying to sweep around a big horde of walkers. Maybe you're trying to one-shot their head. Maybe you're trying to use a shotgun to go against humans, because humans are smarter than walkers. They have helmets and they duck. And so there's sort of this really complex sandbox that you get to play in. And a lot of the complexity is not just visual. Actually, visually, if you look at our game, we took a lot of care to make it look stylized, so we could push the envelope of the VR headsets. But if you go and play something on, I don't know, a next-gen console, it'll look way better, like visual fidelity-wise. But it doesn't have all the other mechanics that we have, right? Like we're running 90 frames per eye. We have physics going on in each one of the bodies that you're interacting with. So there's a lot of stuff under the hood that's happening that, to me, like having a knowledge of part of how games are made is very impressive. So it's something that I'm incredibly proud of the team for doing, because it makes my job easier, right? Like it's way easier when I'm trying to tell you, hey, you can't play this anywhere else. Like, you have to get a headset and sort of overcome that initial resistance to VR, and then jump in and then have your mind blown.
How many people were involved in putting this thing together?
I would say that the team fluctuate. All game teams fluctuate, but in general, I think at its peak, it was probably around 80 people. I think the average was probably around like 50 to 60 throughout the length of the project, and it was about a 2.5 year development timeline.
Hayden, if he's sleeping, he doesn't listen. When we're talking, he goes and he does something else.
I have failed. I thought I was so much more interesting.
I was going to say, hey, to put that onto my Christmas list. It's so much more interesting than Pong.
if you put it on mine too.
All right. Okay. So that sounds incredibly cool. Like, with everything that you're describing, what's coming next?
Well, I think that frankly, I think that VR is still very early. So when you think of VR as a technology, I would think that we are in that kind of early, I would say, like right before the Monster cards dropped. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there was this video card called the Monster card, and it came out and it changed everything, because all of a sudden, like, the textures were crisper. It was the first card that enabled you to have off-processor processing and anti-aliasing, and so everything just looked better. And I think that we're either at that turning point with the Quest 2, or we're like right before it, when you had like sort of like the 486DX, because it is a massive leap. So you've had this year has been a tremendously impactful year for VR, in that we've had the Quest come out basically last year, and we had the Index with Half-Life Alyx, and then we had the Quest 2 just come out right now, right? And those are sort of like milestones that have really driven the technology forward. I think the future of VR is all like inside-out tracking. I think eventually you will have the seamless ability to sort of make certain parts of your experience transparent, so you can see the outside world and the people around you. That's already sort of the case, but I think in the next couple of months you're going to see some stuff come out that'll allow you to do that, so you can have like sort of virtual office and still see the world around you. So I can wear my headset and still interact with you and not feel like I'm isolated, and you not feel like you can mess with me. That's sort of where we are. And you're starting to see people use the technology beyond what the company intends it to be used as. So I'll give you an example of that. So the Quest 2 and the Quest 1 have this, where you have a link cable that allows you to use it as a Rift. So you can use your powerful PC to play games that require more power if you just have a USB-C cable to it. But people have been like, you know what? Like, we have very strong Wi-Fi networks. Can we stream this over Wi-Fi? And you can. It turns out you can virtual machine into your desktop, and so you can have the best of both worlds, right? You can have a wire. It's currently not like plug and play, right? Like, you have to go through a little bit of a hacky setup, use some third-party software, but you can. And this isn't like hacky setup as in like you need to go into the firmware and change stuff. This is like hacky as in like you need to look stuff up on Google and follow instructions, right? And so you can easily have your wireless headset that has like really high resolution, and you can play it wherever you want. And then when you want to use your PC, you can Wi-Fi into your PC and use all the library of content that has been built for PC VR. And so with that, I think it's sort of, if you're a gamer that really wants to experience amazing games, now is a phenomenal time to get into VR, right? And it's one of those moments where, I mean, the new headset is they announced the $300 version, right? It's insane. Like they have to be subsidizing it, just because it's such an easy barrier to entry. And yes, they're competing with the new console generations. And listen, I think the new console generations are going to be great also, but I think that the current console generations are great. Right? There's amazing games on PC and console that you can play right now. So I think that if you're an enthusiast and you really love games, sort of now is a great time to get in VR. And I'm not just saying it because I want you to try our game. I'm saying it because like this is what I tell my friends, right? Like it's finally, and I think Quest 1 was also sort of a good time to get into it, but now it's sort of a no-brainer. Like that if you're someone who's passionate about games and sort of seeing what's next, this is sort of what's next, right? If you want to bring it ahead like 5-10 years, it's always very hard to make accurate predictions, but the easiest thing to think about for me is sort of really small form factor augmented and mixed reality setup, right? So you can think of something that either is running off your phone's processing power, but wirelessly transmitting it to a set of glasses that are kind of covered. So you can still cover the eye completely, but it's a really sort of like low latency and low weight device. Something that you could wear as eyeglasses, but then they turn into a screen. That allows you to just have really quality of life AR. And then I think just like I have my monitors at my desk and my TV in my living room, you're still going to have technology that you decide is the best way to experience something, right? Like I was having this conversation with a bunch of my gaming friends. And like, a lot of people made the mistake and are still making the mistake to trying to say, oh, we want to have this game, this PC game on a mobile device, because then we can tap into all those mobile players. And it's not completely inaccurate to say, if I can engage with my game on my mobile device, I will stay more engaged with my game in general. But the experience of the times when you're playing on your mobile device are different, and you have different entertainment objectives than when you're playing on your PC, than when you're playing on your console, than when you're playing with your friends. In order to design an experience that is great on one of those devices, you're going to have to take some trade-offs. And there's going to be cross-platform. That's the other future part that I think you're going to see a lot of cooperative cross-platform gaming is going to continue to happen, because that's what we all want, right? Like we're all like the majority of gamers are now in their 30s and 40s, and they still want to play because that's a great way to be entertained and connected with your friends. But now they want to play with their kids, and they want to play with their friends, and they want it to be seamless, and they don't want obstacles caused by you having an Xbox and me having a PC, or you having a PlayStation and me having a Switch. Like, and the gaming industry is coming around to that. It's obviously working against some of their interests, so it's taken a while. But in general, what the players want is a seamless game experience that they can share with their friends. And these, there's still room for single player experiences too, right? Like I want to be able to enjoy myself by myself. Like sometimes I just need it to be my thing, right? But that's sort of like where I think the technology will push game experiences, both from a technological innovation that we can touch. Like a headset is very much tactile, right? You see it, you're like, oh my God, this looks like the future, right? Or a future. But to me, sort of cross-platform play across all games would be a much more disruptive innovation to the industry that it's taken forever to do, because the interests of the businesses aren't aligned with the interests of the players.
Well, since this is such a new technology, are there any misconceptions that people have about VR gaming?
Yeah, so there's a couple actually that come all from like the initial hype cycle. So a lot of VR games don't make you sick. Some VR games do make you sick. The sort of feeling of sickness that you feel, one, is something that you can habituate yourself out of. Two, you can take Dramamine or use the relief band. And three, there's game design elements that reduce nausea. So for example, if I don't have you do a barrel roll, or if I don't, like there's things that I can do with your line of sight to sort of like focus your eyes and you see a lot of that done in our game. So we have things like snap turning, we have things like foveated rendering, we have things like reducing your line of sight when you're moving faster. Like if you're running, it's sort of like closing in your line of sight. And what that does is it makes it just more comfortable on your body. So a lot of people that maybe tried VR 3-4 years ago, and they tried a simulation where they put you in this like spaceship that was like navigating around the city, like that'll make you very ill, especially if you're prone to that, or a certain percentage of the population. And so a lot of that we've gotten a lot better at. I think that there's still a lot of challenges in that, like just it can still be isolating, but there's a lot of games that aren't isolating. Right? Like they have multiplayer Beat Saber you can play. You can seeing somebody else in VR and being able to talk to them is still like this kind of like mind blowing moment. it's like you almost have this weird feeling of, as an adult, and I'm like a pretty big extrovert, it's still a weird feeling of like, hey, digital person whom I don't know the identity of, but I'm seeing represented in front of me. So I think that there's just, to me, that can be a very positive surprise, but of course it's something that people should be aware of before getting into it. And then I think that at the beginning, people said something like, kids under 13 shouldn't use VR headsets because it like messes with their perception of reality. You always have this at the beginning of technology cycles, right? Like you have people making big bold claims and then
Oh, rock, absolutely, like rock and roll, right?
Exactly, right? Like it's always going to be the case, right? But I think that, and over time, people just like, as humans, we do have a trait that is sort of self-destructive, but also innovative, which is a lot of times we just don't listen. Or, you tell me that's a bad idea, but I want to see for myself. And so the outcome of that is that we will find out the ones that are actually bad ideas because people will do dumb stuff with them. I would say these are pieces of it. So a lot of the VR headsets have chaperone systems now. Where you kind of draw your space and then a grid comes up so you don't break all your stuff. And I would recommend that somebody new definitely set that up and doesn't skip that setup. That way you don't start hitting stuff around your house. Because I definitely, so our game is so intense that I was testing it in my office and I totally skipped that because, I work in VR, so I'm immune to these things, right? And so I definitely like just straight up punched my TV and like it was just broke it. Like, and the IT department was not too happy. And I was just an idiot, like I just could have just like set up the chaperone system. But anyway, so, it's something that I find really exciting and I can't recommend enough. And I'm also I generally tend to be like pretty, like I'm not trying to push it on people, right? Like try it out, like see if you like it. Some people are late adopters, right? Like some people are like, I want to see more people play it and say it's great before I try it. That's cool too, right? Like the way I look at games, and it's the same commentary I had when I worked in mobile games for a while. I was like, if you build great stuff, eventually massive amounts of players will come. So like just focus on building great stuff and don't try to force it. Tell people it's great, have them try it out. And generally, if you're building great things, you will have a great business over time. And that's sort of what I like to follow when I try to make business decisions. And our side of the business is like, should we make this? Like, does it make sense to make it? If it makes sense to, like, what are we trying to do here? Like, if we're trying to do something that's been done before and it doesn't really push an envelope, like, why are we doing it? Like, let's do something else. Let's do something that really brings the medium forward, that really that will stay with players and create really valuable memories.
When you decide to make a game like Saints and Sinners, so The Walking Dead, Saints and Sinners, and you're going after the Walking Dead fan, does that put a ton of pressure on you?
I think that working with any IP, I've worked on a lot of large IPs. I've worked on Star Wars. I've worked on Marvel. The Walking Dead is a really big IP as well. You have to have a part of your team be super fans of the franchise, because you want to be aware of how a super fan feels, and you want to create something that is authentic to what they want. Simultaneously, you can't just do fan service. Like creating a story and creating something special for a fan of a franchise means that you have to add something new and cool that they weren't expecting. Because that's what got them into the franchise to begin with, right? Like they didn't get to it because it was just something they were expecting, right? So you have to, in my opinion, be cognizant of that. To me, it's always an opportunity to work with a franchise. Like from a pure business perspective, you're working with a very large audience that will at least read the first article that you put out there. And they'll be like, all right, I'll see what this is about. Whether they're, skeptical and optimistic or skeptical and pessimistic, you'll get their initial click. And then you need to make sure that what you have to tell them is something that they will appreciate, right? That is respectful of their fandom. And so I think that is the risk part. Like when you work with a really large IP, there's a massive risk component if you build something that isn't up to their standards or that isn't provably something worth their time. And obviously, like the scale of your endeavor matters also, right? If I'm just making, Baby Yoda keychain, I'm sure that if I make a crappy one, they just won't buy it. But like, there will be less scrutiny than if I'm trying to make a new TV show based on Baby Yoda, right? And so where I'm getting at with that is that, the VR space allowed us to tell a brand new story to an audience that had expectations, and we wanted them to understand that we got that they wanted to feel in that world, but they could go somewhere else to consume another like Daryl, Carol, and Rick story. Like there's places you could do that. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to go and create something new, put people in that kind of survivor mindset. We said, if you're not a fan of The Walking Dead and you play our game, will you love it? That was like the prerequisite. Prerequisite is yes, you will love it. And then if that is true, then fans of The Walking Dead that come will love the fact that we created a great game in their universe. And that's so that was sort of the mentality we went after to tackle this, and it seems like players really respected that. And in general, that would be my advice to anybody making IP games. And the larger the IP, the bigger the risk, but also the bigger the reward.
Yeah, that kind of brings up, I read an article that you were in from venturebeat.com, and it mentioned that a large part of developing the game was the storytelling. So going out and, like you were just mentioning, that you want to bring in people that may not be a fan of a Walking Dead, also, make sure that the fan does love it. Like, what kind of process do you go to build out that story?
Well, so Skybound are really good partners of ours, and they created the Walking Dead universe. So we work really closely with their creative leads. They sit right in the room with our narrative writers, and together we craft the stories, and we come up with essentially like what is this new story in the Walking Dead universe? How does it fit? There's a lot more to it that we may not expose, right? Like there may be factions that we created that may be connected to factions from the world that we just haven't talked about yet. You do a good world building exercise and a good story building exercise, and you do it with the people who've created the IP. That way you can be authentic to the creative process that has spawned it. And then on top of it, you add something new that you feel is fresh and that makes people fall in love once again with the story. From our perspective, the thing that we felt was sort of a bold storytelling choice is the fact that you could just go and kill anybody in the game. Just like you could if you are a sociopath and a quest giver is asking for help and you're like, you know what, I'm bored, I'm just going to pop you in the head. We wanted you to be able to do that. And the reason we wanted you to be able to do that is because we felt that in VR, it's a unique environment where it feels strange to have an unkillable NPC. You're there, you have a gun, unless you're like in a sci-fi setting where they have some sort of force field, I should be able to shoot you. And so we wanted to really make it that grounded in reality. We wanted it to be like, if there's someone that we shoot and they don't die right away, there should be a reason. Maybe they have a riot shield. Maybe they have a vest protecting them from the bullets. But like it has to be logical. It has to fit within the very realistic world of The Walking Dead, other than the whole zombies. But like that was sort of the place we started and the blocks that we built upon to create the experience. And I think people really appreciate it. Like you can see, go on YouTube and look at videos of our game. People had a really good time just sort of coming up with their own roleplay scenarios with the inhabitants of our world because we gave you such like ultimate freedom. And so like there's all these concepts that play together. Like player fragility was another big one, which is we didn't want you to be sort of this like gung-ho hero. There's some games out there where you can feel that, and that's awesome. But we wanted you to feel like you were always in danger and you were always sort of this fragile person. And some people have dinged us for it. They're like, oh man, I feel like I'm like an old man that's like running out of breath and like malnourished. I'm like, yeah, you're in the apocalypse. You've been eating like Cheetos and like Twinkies and like you're carrying heavy gear around and it's hot and sticky. Like, what do you think is going to happen? You're going to run and walkers are constantly on you. So that's generally, I think that a lot of people appreciated that, and it seems like they've taken to it pretty well.
Well, Cheetos and Twinkies are still part of my, it's part of my diet.
Hey, listen, I'm not saying that it can't be part of your diet. I'm just saying that if you rely on them for sustenance for many months at a time, I think you'll probably see some results.
I do. But anyways, Guy, want to talk to you about a quote,
Okay.
either something that you live by or something that you've made up. But you got a quote for us?
I thought about this a lot, and there's quite a few quotes that I really enjoy. But there's one that, like, lately I've been thinking about a lot because there's a bunch of, the game industry is a pretty volatile industry. I've had some friends that have, essentially, like, lost the job that they were working on for a long time, that they were really in love with. And I've had, acquaintances. It's, you never know when a project will end or when you'll decide that, like, things aren't right for you. Um, and that's generally a good advice for any career. In general, my approach, I think that the earlier you realize that the work you are in, no matter how much you love it, is just part of your career, the better. It's very easy when you're kind of going from one role to another to sort of get down on yourself. And so the quote that I leave you is actually a Frank Sinatra quote, which is one of my favorites. And it says, "The best revenge is massive success." And I think I'm quoting it correctly. You can go ahead and audit me. But the idea behind that I think is very powerful. I was using it for a friend that had recently left an institution, was not treating her very well, and she was just starting her own business. I think that everyone should really keep these words to heart. It's like the focus should be, what am I doing today? Every time a relationship ends and something new starts, it's exciting. Every time you've decided there's a next chapter in your life, you should be super excited about it because you get to create the next step. And there's two sort of realities of that. One is you will tell yourself it was the right decision. Like your memory is something that you create, and that is, as we know, at least in part subjective. So eventually you'll convince yourself that that was the right move. So you'll feel better about it. But on top of it, focusing on what you're doing on the future is what's going to make that, it's going to make your future more successful. And that is the best sort of trail to leave across your career. And so that's the words of encouragement that I leave to anyone that's in the middle of a career transition or like stuck somewhere that they're not enjoying and trying to figure out what's next. In the end, like, another thing I used to always tell people that were having trouble with their work was, listen, every moment that you spend doing something that you don't love is way more damaging to you than to the company. The company is always able to sort of weather a little bit of dead weight here and there and weather a little bit of inefficiency here and there. But an individual only has so much time in their life. So that's my other sort of angle on it, which is like, always think about what you're doing and is it exactly what you want to be doing, or should you be like thinking about what that is? Because otherwise the biggest time wasted and the biggest cost is to you.
Hey, I love it. Thanks for those words of wisdom.
Hopefully I picked something up through my, slings and arrows of outrageous fortune.
I mean, I really liked it. Yeah, and I might be telling a few other people about that Frank Sinatra quote too. But
it's a good one. It's
a great one.
Got that. It's uplifting.
Yeah. Now, one of the reasons why we put together this podcast, Hayden, myself, a lot of people that I know just got tired of getting bombarded with these stupid success Facebook ads, wherever you were looking, Instagram, make money online. You see some guy in front of a Lamborghini flashing money, and what it doesn't show, it's the hurdles, how that person or how that entrepreneur became successful. And I mean, that's a major missing link. So we always like to ask, do you have any hurdles that you had to overcome? What were they? How did you get out of it? And what did you learn from it?
Yeah, well, I have one story that I like to tell, which is my absolute favorite because it's the first time that I learned that people will talk you into something that is like career destroying. And they won't necessarily do it because they're trying to harm you. They'll just do it because they think you're really good at something and they will just set you up for failure. And that's something I think everybody should look out for, because if you're not constantly thinking of, can I actually do this? And does this thing that I have now said yes to, is this just going to be the end of my career? And the reason I bring it up is because when you're young and early in your career, not necessarily young, but like early in your career, you are sort of wide-eyed and you're eager and you want to prove yourself. And that to me is the moment where you're most at risk to signing up for something that you can't deliver on. And listen, I don't say don't be ambitious. You should be ambitious. You should be trying to do things that are just outside your reach so you can grow. But you should also have a good read on whether or not those things are actually possible, or whether or not you're setting yourself up for failure. And in general, like being able to say no is, I know it's sort of a cliche, but it's actually an important thing. And so the story is, so I was doing really hot at this company. I built all these tech support centers, and we were really able to solve a lot, keep customer satisfaction high, solve a lot of tech problems really quickly. And so they said, you know what, we're going to put you in charge of this initiative called the root cause analysis initiative. And it's going to be like, you're going to find the problems in the company, all over the company, and you're going to find the cause and get rid of the cause so they go away forever. And at the time I was like, oh, wow, that sounds amazing. And of course, anybody that is an adult and has spent any time in any company or is a parent is like that, you're never going to accomplish that. And you are setting yourself up for a world of hurt, because like, first of all, there's always going to be new problems, but the outcome of that was somewhat surprising is not only was finding the problems wasn't the issue. Like finding root causes was easy. I actually have a brain that sort of is a problem-solving machine, and so that was actually not hard. But the human element I was completely oblivious to. People didn't want to know what the cause of a problem was. They wanted the problems to go away, but they didn't want to be pointed out as the department that had caused the problem, and or the piece of technology that was causing the problem that was built by this individual. They hated that, so they hated me, and so that is tremendous. I recommend nobody ever take that role, or if they take it, like have a lot of caveats and things in place to predict what's going to happen. And in general, that was a really big learning experience for me. I also sort of understood a lot about, like, one of the things that is when you have certain strengths and certain weaknesses, if you have a good mentor and a good leader, they will tell you, like, focus on your strengths because they will give you the most results. Some people will point out your weaknesses and say you need to really work on them. And you may need to work on some of your weaknesses, but you'll always get better returns out of your strengths. And this is, again, another cliche, but definitely something worth remembering because you're just going to, like your investments, like you don't want to pump a bunch of money into something that is not working out just in the hope that it'll turn around. Bring other people in. Admit when there's things you're not good at. And sometimes it's you have to show vulnerability by doing that, but generally you telling people that you're bad at something will result in them respecting you more about the fact that you know that you're bad at something. And usually people don't like to see other people suffer, so they'll usually like help and do what they can to help you out of the situation. So I think that another thing that's I find really important as a lesson out of that is try to not do it all yourself, right? Like understand what you're good at and what you're not, and rope people in. Be like, hey, listen, I signed up for this thing that seems way too big for me. I need your help for this because I can't do this myself. And you'll find that people will become more collaborative. Like that's been my experience, at least. And I also I will say I'll give you a personal anecdote too, which is something that me and my wife have learned over our time together. She is the skeptic, and I'm sort of the guy that gets excited about stuff. So it's great to like run things, have a counterpoint to your personality. As a person that gets excited about things, I'm generally the guy that's like, yeah, let's sign up for this timeshare. I think it's a good idea. And then like, you have the instant regret, like 10 hours later, you're like, what did I just sign up for? So the lesson there is, just be aware of your weak points and your blind spots and like complement them with people that are able to, pull you back from the brink. Because I think that is generally very helpful. And I got reminded of it because you mentioned the whole like, rich, successful guy with a nice car and house that he probably rented on Airbnb. My perspective on that is usually like getting to a feeling of, wow, I'm really in a good spot that like I really like. I want to sort of figure out how to keep doing this. It was a 15-year journey for me, like 15 years of like questioning yourself and like, am I really doing what I love? Or, wow, I really suck at this. Like, and even today, I'll be like doing something, and I'll be like, oh man, this is terrible. Like, and it's just like, you're never going to get rid of it completely, but you'll get to a point where you'll sort of turn corners and be like, all right, this stuff, I was really responsible for this, and it was good. Okay, I could deal with that, and it sort of works against the imposter syndrome, right? And simultaneously, you start noticing that in other people, right? Like generally, people who are really great at their craft don't think they're really great at their craft. They think that they're like, and then they're just slaving at it to try to get better. And this is a generalization, right? Like there's people that are otherwise, and some people are naturally talented, and they know they're naturally talented. But in general, like people try to reinvent themselves and are usually pretty. I find that the people that I like to work with are people who are very aware of their shortcomings and the things they're not good at.
I'd like to learn a bit more about your successes, your biggest success. What would that be?
Well, it's tough because there's a couple of things that I'm proud of in my career. I think that one of the first things that I'm really proud of, I don't think I call it my biggest success, but it was like we created the first scholarship for playing video games in university. I'm still to this day incredibly proud of the fact that it was actually the brainchild of a person that worked for me called Steve Jaworski and a guy named Chris Wyatt. The three of us were like, all right, we definitely want to reward people in school for playing League of Legends, and we want to pay them because like it feels right to pay them. But if we tell that to the school, they're going to hate that. So we should make it a scholarship, and then they'll love it. And so that's the route we took. And so that's how we created the first League of Legends scholarship. That was what I really loved about Riot. I think we did some other stuff there that I really enjoyed, which was sort of kind of letting players get together and gather and create their own events. I really, really learned a ton from. I made this trailer at CD Projekt for the game Gwent. I learned a lot from that. It was like one of the first like CG trailers that I was asked to own end to end. And I personally think I was like really bad at it, but I was at a stage in my career where I knew enough to ask for help, and I received the help, and the people that helped me like ended up making a really great piece. And then I used a lot of that knowledge in my work for Skydance, and I think that the launch, like what we've done this year with The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners, is like one of the proudest things that I have in my career, because I feel like I finally was sort of like in the driver's seat of, all right, end to end, we're going to decide how to bring this game to market. We're going to design all of that. We're going to put the right team together, and then we're going to take it to market to multiple platforms. And we're going to time it correctly, and we're going to work with these great people. And it kind of all came together as a nice symphony. And I'm really happy with it. Not just because it's where I am currently, but because it sort of felt like all the lessons from my career came together and helped me do things faster, like more efficiently, in a space that was relatively unexplored, and where I felt like the things that we said about the game, like I'm very glad to have the conversation with any player and get to see the players' experiences. It's really been awesome. So hopefully it doesn't feel too much like I'm just plugging my game, but that was definitely the trajectory of it.
Yeah, I mean, when we were talking about getting onto the podcast, the game was there, but I've learned so much about it, and that's the key. Like, I think the audience is going to love the information that you've provided. I've really, first of all, I'm going to go and thank Nate for making the connection, because I've really liked this podcast. This is a subject I'm not familiar on, but I'm serious. I gotta get one of these VR games and start batting around my TV. But
yeah, go get the Quest 2, man. It's like it's the right time to get it.
Absolutely. But anyways, look, if people want to reach out or to make contact with you, how do they do that?
I'm like pretty open on LinkedIn. Just send me a message on LinkedIn, and I'm glad to answer. I also part of what I've done simultaneously to my work at Skydance is I advise a lot of startups in the spaces that I feel like I'm relatively well suited to advise in. So I'm very open to having business conversations with people, regardless of whether or not I'll end up doing anything with them. So you have, like, I'm Guy Costantini. I think I'm the first Google result because of my weird last name. And so you can just like message me on LinkedIn, and I gladly answer questions. Just be patient with me because I get to them chronologically.
Yeah, fantastic. So, look, at the end of every podcast, we always turn to our guest and we ask them, do they know a guy?
Yeah, so I actually think that I would recommend a couple of people. I think that there's this really nice lady that works with me called Amy, and she is currently our head of community, but she's also the chairperson for Women in Games International, which is an organization that focuses on sort of the great women that work in the video games field and sort of elevating the status of women across our industry, which is actually a pretty male-dominated one still. I don't even understand how she does what she does. She's a very impressive person. She does those two things and also is a mom in COVID, and it's just, and she's able to still like not pull all her hair out. So I definitely like to recommend her. I also have a couple other people that I have in mind, but let me think about them more, and I will let you know about them.
Perfect. That's fantastic. So, Guy, and see, I didn't say Guy once.
Yeah,
Can't
you
believe
succeeded. You said it all those times in prep, and that you kind of got it out of the way.
I think just before you came out to the call and you were saying, just think of me as a guy, and it's, okay, I got it. But anyways, thank you, sir. I really appreciate you coming on to the podcast today. And like I said, I learned a lot about VR. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great one. Thank you for having me. This is fun.
All right. Until next time.
Bye-bye.
That concludes part 2 of our interview with Guy Costantini. Tune in next time to hear our interview with Anita Luzadi. She's a world-renowned visual artist based out of both London and Sao Paulo. She's also put together a program that brings music and visual art into the prisons in Brazil, and we're going to talk a lot about that. As always, make sure to like and subscribe to the podcast, and if you're on social media, we'd love to hear from you. I don't have very many friends on Facebook, so I need people to talk to. Please help. Anyway, that's enough of me, and I'll see you next time.